Mikey P, Mike Probosi, back in the Money Players podcast weekend recap on Monday here, March the 31st. And my partner in crime, the best recapper on this network, Nick Tammaro, back with me to discuss a very eventful and busy weekend. Nick, welcome in.
High praise, my friend. Indeed, a busy weekend, good racing. Very excited to look back at it a little bit and to look forward and see what we're going to get out of some of these horses that we discuss as they make their final preps, either for the Derby or for some objectives. Maybe that weekend it was a loaded slate, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And these shows, these weekend recaps are sponsored by First Racing. Well, plenty of First Racing tracks to discuss. Most notably, we're going to start at Gulfstream for that Grade 1 Florida Derby, which was won by Tappan Street, who is a lightly raced sort, certainly improving. I thought got a very nice ride in the race. Plenty of speed to chase with Manicat Road and Neoquos or Neo. I don't even know how to say that horse's name. I think that's like one of the craziest names on this Derby trail. Sped it up early, and Tappan Street got the right ride, got the jump on Sovereignty, and was able to win.
Yeah, it played out exactly like that, right? I mean, Tappan Street was a horse that had hinted at having some real ability in a really game maiden win back in December. And Brad Cox, I don't want to say threw him to the wolves, but certainly wanted to test what he was made of in running him in the Holy Bull. And I thought he ran well in there. You know, the question was how much was he going to move forward in his third career start? And he obviously moved forward substantially, earning a 94 Beyer speed figure, taking a clear step forward towards the Derby, sat a good trip just off the pace, took the lead off the turn, and held everybody at bay from there on in, including race favorite Sovereignty. So you would have to consider Tappan Street one of the, 5 biggest contenders for the race as we sit right now, waiting on what happens on this final weekend of big preps that's roughly 5 days away. So, it feels like a horse that's probably 10, 12 to 1, somewhere in there. Bred to handle it, looked like a horse that'll go another furlong without an issue. I think if there's a bone to pick with him, it's that it wasn't all that fast a race. It was only a 94 Beyer. And, in years past, you would generally disqualify a horse that in their final prep ran that slowly. I don't know if you necessarily want to do that. This horse has really yet to run a super fast race. So you'd be projecting in the Derby that he could run that much better. But I thought he did it with a routine amount of ease. And he looked the part, so I don't take anything really away from him. Certainly don't take anything away from Sovereignty either, who I'm sure we were going to touch on next. He was given a very good ride by Manny Franco in what should be a one-race engagement. Presumably Junior Alvarado will be back for the Derby. I thought Manny gave Sovereignty a good ride. He got him into position a little bit more. I thought he got after him a little bit more on the backstretch than Junior had in his prior start in the Fountain of Youth, where he was victorious. And he put in a run. So, no shame in the race that he ran. Obviously, more ground feels like it's always going to be Sovereignty's best weapon. Whether he's a Derby horse, I think, is still a question, but you're going to get a good price if you believe that he is.
Yeah, I don't think he's lost that much in defeat here. I do think that he should move up over the Churchill surface. There seems to be in these preps plenty of speed. They have been dominated by closers, especially these past few prep races. As far as Tappan Street goes, I'm curious what kind of trip he would get in the Derby. He's going to be sort of like a mid-pack kind of stalker type that's going to need to get the jump on some of these closers. So that sometimes works out, but in a 20-horse field, I mean, he could find some trouble for sure.
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, if you're going to make up an appreciable amount of ground, I would say running style-wise, he probably fits a horse like Mystic Dan, right? He wants to be probably, 4 or 5 lengths off of it if the pace is good, and to make his move around the turn and to get into position. He's a horse that Luis Saez fits very well. I don't really love Saez on deep closers. He's a bit more of a pace-oriented jockey, so I think Luis should be able to get him into a comfortable spot and kind of go from there. So, yeah, you mentioned the fast paces in these races over and over. The problem is that we're filtering out some of the speed with these preps. So, no Speed King, no Manicat Road, no John Hancock. Those horses are probably not going to qualify for the Kentucky Derby, which, that could then have a little bit more detrimental effect on how quick the pace gets. But you're right. It's been a largely closer-dominated group of final preps in the championship series thus far.
As far as some of the also-rans, Manicat Road certainly blasted again to the front and got tired. Disruptor, where was he early? I would expected him to be closer early. He was 10th to start, and he ended up finishing 5th in the race. I'm curious what the thoughts would be for him. Certainly, I don't think, considering his trip, he raced all that bad, but he was never a threat.
Yeah, never a threat. Probably a horse that in different connections' hands would have never ended up here, and they would have looked for a bit softer spot to ultimately get him there. But obviously, the connections there, they're pretty much hell or high water as far as the Derby goes. And he was a little outclassed, I think. But yeah, totally out of position. I don't know. That certainly wasn't by design based on the stretch out. I think on paper, we all knew it was going to be a pretty strong early gallop, but nobody could have predicted he would be behind Sovereignty going down the backstretch. So I would imagine they'll regroup. There's usually a one other then on Derby weekend at Churchill, or there's the Peter Pan as options now, maybe to try and get to a race like the Belmont. Todd isn't big on the Preakness, so I don't think you'll see this horse routed there. And quite honestly, I don't know if he would have the necessary points to qualify for the race if it is somewhat close to oversubscribed. So we'll see where he ends up going next, but obviously needs a bit softer competition.
Well, let's jump to the other Derby prep over the weekend. We'll switch over to Oak Lawn for that Grade 1 Arkansas Derby. Speaking of fast paces, we certainly got a wicked one here with Cornucopian and Speed King blasting the whole way around the racetrack. Well, they weren't going to be able to sustain that. Tailor-made for the Sandman Rally. I was talking offline, obviously a group chat with some of the In the Money guys, and I said, in the paddock, I thought Sandman looked the picture. He certainly raced to it. I do think that he got his trip, and he's capable when he can get that kind of trip. He got the jump on Publisher, who was never catching him. Thought Cole Battle, it was just okay. He made that move, but he was never holding off the closers.
No, exactly. I mean, it was a race that was set up perfectly for an off-the-pace horse. Speed King's jockey, Rafael Bejarano, had the option of maybe taking back and trying to stalk Cornucopian, but I think he felt as if his horse's best chance was to go and set the pace as he had in his biggest win to date, which was the Southwest. And, John Velasquez wanted Cornucopian to be a bit forwardly placed. I think Cornucopian ran off a little bit on him as well. I think he would have probably preferred rating him a tad and even letting Speed King open up a length and a half or two. I mean, by the time they straightened away down the backstretch, Mikey, these horses were 8 or 9 lengths ahead of everybody else. They were just flying out there. And to go to shade 46 flat for the half mile is incredible in terms of how quickly they went. So no surprise that it took a heavy toll on both. I think there's two conversations here. You talk about the horses that ran 1-2, and then you talk about Cornucopian. So let's talk about the horses that ran 1-2 first. And obviously Sandman and Publisher came from deep in the pack. They were, roughly 12 to 15 lengths off the pace. And Sandman was given a new rider for this race. Jose Ortiz really rode him to perfection. Jose's clearly riding with a lot of confidence right now off a 30% winter meet at Fairgrounds. And he started to move Sandman into the race around the turn. I think he sensed he had Publisher on his back, and he really got after him at about the 3/8 pole. You knew coming to the quarter pole that he was going to pack a mighty wallop. Cole Battle was moving at the same time. Cole Battle probably was hurt by being, even if he was 8 or 9 lengths off it, he was probably a little too close to that pace. He reached the front as the baton was being passed from one horse to another, so to speak, and really put up very little resistance on Sandman because he was coming with that rally. Publisher finished well. He has the look of national lore. I've seen a few people bring that up, a maiden from 30 years ago that ran in the Kentucky Derby. He certainly got enough qualifying points, and you would think he's got the right kind of running style to maybe get a share of it. He's a horse that probably will run in the Derby and then be an awfully heavy favorite to break his maiden if he doesn't end up doing it there. So I thought they took full advantage of the setup. It obviously did not come home as fast as it could, but that's what's ends up happening. I think 39.71 for the final 3 furlongs. That's a classic collapse race sign. And Sandman was the one who was moving at the right time.
Now, what kind of chances do you think? Obviously, he's going to need a setup again, but he's been, I think, solid most of this prep trail. He always makes his run. He really always fires. We mentioned that where's all the speed going to come from in the Derby, but I do think that he's going to make his run. It's just a matter of, I think, circumstances. Because he got a 99 figure here. That's solid enough. That's faster than a lot of these others are going.
No, it really is. I mean, and the question is, how does he become something different from all the Tappets over the years that have kind of clunked along and gotten a piece of it? I mean, you think of Tacitus as probably one of the more recent ones, and Sandman's profile is really very similar to that of a horse like Tacitus. I don't really want to throw that label on him just yet in terms of how many times Tacitus lost winnable races, but an off-the-pace horse that wants to kind of grind away. His PPs now look far better with that 99 showing after, having a lifetime top of 92 prior to that. A horse that clearly is durable. He's run frequently. He ran in all 3 of the graded local preps and ran well all 3 times. Clearly, benefited from the setup, but I don't see why he's not a horse that if you liked him going in, you have to like him coming out. He's probably going to be every bit of 12 or 15 to 1 too, I would imagine, depending on a little bit of what we get this coming weekend, both are all across the country. So yeah, feels like a horse that's on the short list of contenders.
And you tweeted after the race, you thought Cornucopian would be awesome in the 3-year-old sprint type races. Do you think that's what his future is?
Yeah, I'm not going to be, I said that. And then, of course, the more I reflected on it, the more I thought, he probably deserves one more shot in a graded route. So, do I think they'll send him to a race like the Preakness? And that seems a tad ambitious, but, could you kind of work your way into the Belmont? And maybe he's the horse that goes in the one other than at Churchill on Derby weekend to try and get to the Belmont. But he feels like a horse deserving of one more opportunity. The risk that you run if you don't sort of concede that he's better going shorter now is you really can't get him to a sprint race until August. So he's very good. There's no question about it. Wherever he lands next, he's going to make his presence felt because he's very fast. And he showed a lot more stamina and a lot more determination in that 4th place finish than a lot of horses would, given what he had been involved in early.
Let's jump back to the female races for the past weekend. And we had Oaks Preps back to Gulfstream and the Gulfstream Park Oaks Grade 2. It was race 9 on Saturday, and 5G was as advertised there. Went off favored coming out of the Oaklawn race last time. Raced in the Honeybee there and lost the quiet side. We'll talk about her in just a minute. But I thought she controlled this race, really never looked a loser, Nick. And as promised, I thought raced okay to be second, and the rest of them were nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, obviously something went wrong with the Queen's MG, who was pulled up, but 5G did what she was supposed to do. She had the most speed in the race. I thought Manny Franco rode her with a lot of confidence. And those short stretch mile and a 16th races are not necessarily geared towards speed. A lot of times you have horses that end up going quickly in the run to the first turn because it's a little bit elongated, and that'll quicken things up. But she was in control the whole way. And yes, it was a good weekend for Quiet Side based on that 5G performance. I think it dispelled a little bit of the notion that the Rebel was run over some gigantic inside bias, because 5G obviously took full advantage of it. So did Banishing, who came back and won the Oaklawn Mile. I know that's a race that we're not going to talk about, but those were horses that had spent all of the entirety of their prior starts on the rail on Rebel Day, and they came back and both ran very well again. So I don't think that's a terribly big concern. But 5G, a horse that's quick and now has answered the bell going long 3 times. So I would rate her a serious contender in what's becoming a really nice group for the Oaks. Gradually we've got 4 horses now that have earned Beyer speed figures of 90 or more, including the undefeated Good Cheer and 5G as well.
Yeah, Good Cheer after last weekend was looking like a clear favorite. I think she will be favored, but we'll switch to the fantasy there at Oaklawn. You mentioned Quiet Side. Her and Simply Joking really got after it and went after each other the whole way around the racetrack. Ultimately, Quiet Side was able to wear her down, but I thought they both raced very well. Ended up 8 3/4 lengths ahead of the 3rd place finishers there. Those two look like serious contenders for the Oaks.
They do. And I mean, one thing that maybe is a little different based on our conversation of the Derby is that these Oaks contenders we keep adding in are pretty much all speed horses, right? Because Simply Joking and Quiet Side will both come back. 5G will come back. They're all speed horses. So the Oaks feels like a race that could have a pretty strong early pace. But this was a really fun race to watch. The public bet Quiet Side like it was a foregone conclusion, and
Right.
Simply Joking was the morning line favorite, but it ended up the Quiet Side was a clear favorite, and she ran to it. And really, around the turn, I thought, I think Simply Joking's got a little bit of horse left, and she might be able to spurt away, but Quiet Side really wore her down. This is a really good training job by John Ortiz, who's a good trainer. He had a very good Saratoga last year. This was a horse that was a grade 1 caliber filly at 2 and is now coming back and winning meaningful Oaks preps at 3. So that's not an easy thing to do. And if you think about it, I mean, Immersive obviously had an injury. Everybody else was nowhere to be found around Labor Day of last year when Quiet Side was running a good second in the spinaway. So real credit to John Ortiz, a guy who makes his winter home at Oaklawn. Will she be as good outside of Oaklawn? I mean, she's pretty much run well everywhere, so I'm not all that concerned about it. But now the key for Johnny Ortiz is figuring out how to keep her as good as she could possibly be over the course of the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, I'm a big John Ortiz fan. I know that he probably hasn't won as many races at Oaklawn as he would have liked, but I've always liked this filly here. She was, I thought, very good last year, especially at Saratoga.
Absolutely.
Ran into some of the heavies there, but she's always kept a good account of herself. I couldn't resist the price on Simply Joking in this race. I thought 3-1 was pretty fair value, and like you mentioned, around the turn, it looked like that maybe she was going to sneak away. Ultimately, I do think she got worn down, and I do think that Jose Ortiz made a big difference here. Also, really just never let her take a deep breath in the race, and that made all the difference late. I do think, though, that Simply Joking certainly has plenty of talent, and maybe she's the one that was only her third lifetime start that steps forward off this race. I wouldn't be all that afraid to bet her in the Oaks, especially if she shows up there.
I agree. I mean, the concern would be if the race is loaded with speed, that's obviously going to make her job a little tougher. But the thing that I keep coming back to with Simply Joking is that the connections have obviously always loved this horse, right? Mm-hmm. They debuted her in a stakes race. So, and these are not connections that are just dreaming big. This is clearly a filly with a lot of talent. And I think if they can work on getting her to relax a little bit early, maybe a little bit off the pace, I think that would help her chances substantially. But yeah, I mean, you get a 90 Beyer speed figure in your third start in a grade 2 race. You're obviously serious. So I think she's a major player in 5 weeks or so.
Jump back to Gulfstream for Saturday for their big Florida Derby card, and White Barrio had a nice little paid workout in the Ghost Zapper Stakes there. But Power Squeeze was in that race. I thought she gave quite the account of herself. Really, I'm not sure what she's doing against these horses, but she was second in there, and I thought raced extremely well.
Yeah, I made the comment to Brian Nadeau on the show that he and I did last week that when Jorge Delgado was in the paddock, he needed to whisper to him that he can run Power Squeeze in restricted races. And then she went out and ran this gigantic race to be second. And arguably one of her best races to date. Speed figure wise, it equaled her lifetime top, which came in the Pegasus. So, she's not just getting towed home by these males. She absolutely beat both Tuscan Sky and Lightning Tones for second and chased that pace the entire way. So she was far more involved early. It was about what you would expect from White Barrio. It was not nearly as good as the Pegasus. It probably wasn't ever supposed to be. This was a intermediate stop on the expressway, if you will, that is White Barrio's 2025, with the Met Mile now being the goal. I guess they're going to bring him to the Met Mile off a 10-week layoff, which just sounds kind of brutal, but that's the plan. So, will he is now 8 for 10 at Gulfstream. He's been virtually flawless there. Will he take his game at that level elsewhere is the question. He failed in the Met Mile last year when he was obviously going the wrong direction, but Saffie Joseph Jr. has definitely refurbed this horse's career and gotten him back into top form. So we know what the good White Barrio looks like. I think we all thought that those days were gone when he sort of ended his 2024 campaign abruptly, but it looks like they're still here. So he'll be a very exciting entrant in the Met Mile, which there are a lot of moving pieces to that race right now, but it feels like if the horses that are supposed to be there end up there, it could be a very, very good race.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, we get, Sierra Leone coming. We know that he didn't race that well last weekend, but I mean, certainly with his class, you have Fierceness still out there that could be back in the mix and show up in that spot. I mean, there's plenty of other returnees that can definitely make that race very good. And I think White Barrio's been, he's been busy. I mean, he's had quite the winter there. I mean, he had a couple races to prep for that Pegasus, and now they're racing him here. So, he's not sitting in the barn. He's getting after it, but he gets away from his beloved Gulfstream. So we'll see what happens with him going forward. A couple other stakes races over the weekend at Gulfstream. We had the return of Far Bridge there in the Pan American. Nick got a great ride from Rosario. How about Corruption, who ended up second in there? That one is certainly on the improve. But Far Bridge, I'm sure lots of bigger fish to fry as the year goes on.
Yeah, huge effort from Corruption. And, hats off to Mark Casse, who had a tremendous championship meet at Gulfstream. I think I mentioned to Brian last week that Mark wanted a 15% clip. It felt like he was winning a lot more regularly than that, but Mark runs a lot of horses. So Corruption ran very, very well. Far Bridge looked like he'd probably run right by him when they straightened out in the stretch, and he really dug in and fought him all the way to the wire. Clearly, this was just a starting point for Far Bridge, who I imagine now will go to look at races like the Man of War and the Manhattan as they get towards the Sword Dancer title defense there a little bit later on in the summer. But game effort and good performance by both. Corruption, at least at this point, has earned his way into the meaningful graded races down the line.
Yeah, I like Tawny Porn a little in there. He really never looked all that great. I'm curious to see what they do with him. I know he was laid up prior to this race, but that was one of his worst races in a while, it seemed.
Yeah, I bet him. I needed him so bad in the United Nations last year and just loved him that day. And I think his best days are behind him. I think Christoph's gotten about everything that was to be had out of him. And this horse has been with two good trainers in his career and just kind of an is what he is kind of horse, right? Just hasn't really ever developed to the point we would have liked him to. But he might need a little bit softer competition as well.
A couple stakes races on Saturday at Santa Anita, graded races. And we had the grade 3 San Carlos there. That was won by a Baffert favorite, Pilot Commander, who got a pretty nice ride up the inside to win 2-5. He was in there. Was 3-1 in the Malibu versus the Raging Torrents and the strong holds of the world. A couple allowance, a 2x win, and now this grade 3. Curious to see where this one shows up next.
Yeah, 95 Beyer speed figure, a little on the underwhelming side, but you mentioned Raging Torrent. I mean, he's one of the horses that we want to see come back in a race like the Met Mile. He's supposed to run the Godolphin Mile on Saturday over at Maidan. But Pilot Commander, it looked a little dicey for a brief period of time around the turn. He ended up getting a clear passage through on the rail and finished strongly to win going away. Not really much of a field that behind him. I picked Vlahos in the race, who checked out at the quarter pole, hoping that maybe he could sneak away from the field. And the sprint ranks out west are pretty much Straight No Chaser and everybody else. And so Straight No Chaser now spending the majority of his winter and spring in the Middle East. Everybody's gotten to feast a little bit, but if he's back for races like the Bing and the Pat O'Brien, then these horses are in big trouble.
Yeah, lots of big money out there, and then there's certainly that horse is very sharp. I think he'll show back up in Dubai this weekend also. Race 8 on Saturday was the grade 3 Wilshire Stakes here, and it went to Tirapati on the front end at even money for Rispoli. I didn't mind that one, but I thought Alphabella getting back to the grass might show something in there. I thought she raced okay, was never threatening to the winner, who just was able to control the race from start to finish.
Yeah, the public really honed in on Tirapati, better down to even money. And a little did we think she'd go straight to the lead, but she did. This was a clever move by Umberto Rispoli. And trainer Jonathan Thomas took a limited number of horses out west last fall, and he has just done extremely well, winning multiple graded stakes races, both at Del Mar and Santa Anita. And this was another good example of it. I'm going to be intrigued to see how long he ends up staying out there. He might just decide that he's going to try and rebuild his stable out west, because what he brought out there so far has worked very well. And this was no exception. Alphabella ran well, probably her best effort since going to Sadler, at least her first on turf. So now he's got the question to deal with of where is she better, right? Where is she supposed to run? There's meaningful races on both surfaces throughout the summer, but no doubt Tirapati was the best on the day, given that pace and where everybody that was around her early finished.
Well, Nick, that was a huge weekend this past weekend. We have another big one that comes up this weekend, Wood Memorial. We got the start of Keeneland. I know you being the morning line maker will be definitely tied into. As far as the Wood, they've drawn that already. Do you think that they can turn the music down enough to get the race to go on Saturday?
Boy, let's hope so, right? It seems like if there's a problem to be had, then Naira has it at Aqueduct right now. So, yeah, we're going to hope that doesn't end up being the case this time around. But it's a good field. It's a fun race. Captain Cook's back off a layoff, after running in the Withers, winning that race very nicely. We've also got some upstart types that include Rodriguez, who has had the misfortune of running into his stablemates the last 2 times, but looks for a little redemption this time around. Mike Smith's going to come over to ride. He looks like the inside speed as well. And Bob Baffert's done well in the Wood Memorial in the past, especially with pace types. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to the Santa Anita Derby draw, which will be a little bit later today. We're taping this on Monday, of course. And then the Bluegrass will be drawn tomorrow. I have a list of what look like pretty ironclad probables in the Bluegrass. It's going to be a field of 7. I think I'm not speaking out of turn in saying that the headliners are the likes of River Thames, East Avenue, Chancellor McPatrick, and Burnham Square. So should be and Almighty as well. So should be a fun race. Fingers crossed for some good weather at Keeneland this weekend. It looks like it could be a little dicey, but hopefully the sun shines bright on our old Kentucky home.
Well, lots of coverage on the Indy Money Media Network all week for these prep races and leading up to the Derby. Nick, always great to have you. Great to talk to you. Hopefully we'll be doing some more work this week on some of these prep races, but hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Pleasure was all mine, my friend. Talk soon.
Well, if you're watching on video, check out some of the other videos on the In the Money YouTube channel. If you're listening on audio, we'll be back right after this. We'll talk to you soon.